Hello, everyone. I am Cured podcast, episode 7. Today, I have a very, very special guest. She's one of my favorite people in the world that I just love talking to, and I get the pleasure of working with her. How awesome is that when you get to work with one of your favorite people? So I want to introduce Sister Susanne Hartung. She is a leader at my workplace. She's actually the Chief Mission Integration Officer. Did I say that correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. But anyways, she's an amazing woman. I met her within probably the first couple weeks of joining Providence, and we just connected. And she actually is sat with me during chemo. Just a beautiful, beautiful person. And I really am blown away by who she is, and you'll get to hear her story here in a second. But I just wanted to give her a really warm welcome to the podcast, and just how delighted I am that she was able to join me today for this conversation. So with that, Sister Susanne, I wanted to kind of give you the floor to just basically, first talk about your role at Providence, because not everyone knows about Providence, and I haven't shared too much about my workplace on these podcasts, but I'm definitely, I think God had a hand with setting me up with the best possible workplace for what I was going to have to endure 6 months after I got hired, which is being diagnosed with stage 4 terminal cancer. With that, Sister Susanne, I first question for you is just really, what's your role at Providence, and how long have you been there for?
Thanks, Tony. You are very generous with your remarks. I don't consider myself an amazing person. I think God has put so many people on this earth to find out what their actual role is in life. So I'm a Sister of Providence, and the Sisters of Providence actually started Providence Health System in 1856 when they came from Montreal into the Northwest. So my whole community has always been focused on what does the community need and who are the poor and the vulnerable. So that's my DNA as a Sister of Providence. And 3 years ago, we joined with Sisters of St. Joseph Health System. And like us, their community was formed to take care of the poor and vulnerable. So we have a very defined mission statement, which says, as expression of God's healing love, witness through the ministry of Jesus, we are steadfast serving all, especially the poor and the vulnerable. My job is to see that culture and that mission statement is sustained through all decisions, through all the hiring. So Tony, when you say you've met wonderful people at Providence, they come because of the mission.
Right.
And many times after they've been here a while, they'll say, I was just really called to Providence. And I think you have been called to Providence, Tony. I mean, it's a way that God directed you into a place where you can flourish and be loved. We have very special love for our caregivers, and I hope that you felt that. We're not very restrictive, on time off or health issues, but we truly want to love them and to be Jesus to these people. So that kind of defines my role. Kind of everybody at Providence kind of knows I'm there and what I stand for.
Right.
And it's just such a blessing. I have been with Providence for 60 years. I've been a Sister of Providence for 60 years.
Wow.
And I love my work, and my intention is just to drop dead in my office. So I think I have about 10 more years. So thanks, Tony.
And for those of you listening, like, she is such I don't know the word to use, but when Sister Susanne calls you, you show up. We were sitting in my chemo session, and she's like, I need to call, I think his name was Chris, right? Who runs the hospital over here in Issaquah. And he was down in like 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, he's a friend, Tony. Right. I just said, I'm down here with Tony, and the infusion
Here's the guy running the hospital, right?
Comes down, yeah.
A million things to do. And she picks up the phone, calls him, and he's like right down. But I mean, all that is just the love that I think that, you have with, everyone that you've touched, at Providence, and they all know who you are, and they all know what you're about. And the one thing I did want to mention is because, with diversity, I also don't want to leave people with, we just hire Christians, right? Because we don't.
We don't. No, right? Not at all.
And what's great and what I love about how you deal with faith is it's a very open conversation. And, we have people, that follow, Buddhism, Hinduism,
Muslims,
exactly. There's no discrimination on faith, with what we do. It's all inclusive, but everyone's like rowing in the same direction with just wanting to like do the best for the poor and vulnerable. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because that's what impressed me the most. It's like, wow, it's all inclusive. It's we're doing great work, and no one ever feels left out.
I'm happy to speak to that, because we don't want anyone to feel discriminated. And I always say I have the privilege of interviewing all of our executives. And the one thing is I want you to know, you don't have to be Christian, you don't have to be Catholic. But in that mission statement that I mentioned, as expression of God's healing love witnessed through the ministry of Jesus, a lot of that does not resonate with our caregivers, but the next two do. To be steadfast in serving all, especially the poor and the vulnerable. So many times I'll say to them, here's our mission statement. What resonates with you? I don't really care, but something's got to resonate with you.
Right.
So most of them will say to take care of the poor and vulnerable. And I always say to all of our caregivers, please share with us your tradition, your faith tradition. We learn from each other in our diversity. So I treasure that.
That's awesome. Yeah, very cool. Very cool. And as you guys know, part of the I Am Cured, I guess byline to the methodology is a journey of faith, healing, and mindset. And faith is a big part of it. Faith is such an important thing with healing. And it's one of those things where I wanted to highlight at the beginning of this podcast, because I just think it's such a cornerstone to being cured. What has been kind of that direction that you've taken with your faith to actually make an impact, not only through the workplace, but in your life?
Thanks, Tony, for that question. It's pretty deep. My faith directs me with a great deal of peace, because I realize I have control over nothing. So I don't get too stressed out. I believe that God has a design for me and for you and for all people, and for the world. And right now the world is very, very complex with lots of suffering. The one thing that I'm going to ask God when I get to heaven, which I plan on, is tell me about why so much suffering in the world. That does bother me. Suffering is very painful for me on every front. So, but I would say I try to help our teams that are struggling with anything, that these are situations we have no control over. And we just have to believe, we have to trust, and we have to believe that we're doing the right thing. And I always try to support the heavy decisions that we have to make.
Mm.
But like I say, I just don't think we have control over anything. We think we do. That was probably the biggest lesson I learned through my cancer.
I did want everyone listening just to kind of hear from you, you know, the miracle that you are today, you know, that, you know, they basically told you you had 5 years, what, like 30 years ago?
Yes.
Yeah. And you're here, you're vibrant, you're talking with me today. You're a 20-year-old in a 50-year-old body. Right?
That's a good one.
Right. But can you just tell everyone that's listening today kind of, you know, about that journey, about your cancer journey in particular? I'd love for them to hear that.
Yeah. About 30 years ago, I just was feeling tired, which is not my energy pack. And so I went to the doctor, just my primary, and they took tests, and they found out I had a lymphoma. And I mean, lots of tests, whatever. And then my doctor said, you know, you have about 5 years. So during that 5 years was so interesting for me, because immediately I surrendered. And I think I used that word to you, Tony, when we first talked about your cancer. You've got to surrender. You can't fight. And the surrendering came in a sense that I don't want to die. I told God, I don't want to die. You know, I think I have some work to do. But also I was at peace that whatever was going to happen was going to happen. One of the beautiful things that happened in those 5 years is I went to Ireland, which is one of my home places. My mother was Irish, and I went with my sister and brother-in-law, and we stayed on the Irish Sea for a month. And one of the doctors had given me his house there because he wanted me to be cured. And so I journaled every day, and I just kept thinking about this doctor saying, Ireland will cure you. I said, okay. So, you know, with a lots of pints of beer, Irish beer, we came home, and I still have my journal. You know, we walked along the sea. We were in a very idyllic area with sheep and cows right in our front yard, and we were kind of on a farmland overlooking the water, but it was beautiful. So I treasure that, because during that time, it was such a reflective time for me in terms of who I was, who I wanted to be, and how I felt God's presence so much through all this. So I came through that, and I've been treated about, maybe every 5 years for this lymphoma with chemo treatment. It's been under control. I just call it a chronic thing. But
Right.
5 years ago, I had severe pain in my back, and I went to the doctor, and they found a tumor in my spine. The pain was so excruciating that if I had a gun, I would have shot myself. I mean, it was excruciating. Oh. And at that time, I'm laying on the floor yelling, Jesus, and I'm going, somehow I kind of related to the suffering of Jesus on the cross. Right. But I in my own mind, I'm saying, how can any human being ever suffer this excruciating pain? So I was at Swedish for 10 days. There was no drug that was cutting the pain. And then my niece, who is an oncology nurse, flew up from LA, told the doctors, suggested morphine. So they started giving morphine, and it subsided. But they started this very severe chemo of 5 drugs, and they were heavy doses. They couldn't operate because it was intertwined into my nervous system. So these 5 drugs that I took for chemo for 8 months, I stayed in the medical floor with the Sisters of Providence. But one drug caused me to lose my ability to walk. So I had physical therapy every single day, and I had to learn how to walk again. I still limp, and my one right leg is damaged through this one chemo drug. But during that time of 8 months, again, it was like Ireland, and the ability to be alone. I had visitors, but I didn't want the world to know that I was sick. But I did have, and my family was there every weekend. But again, it was such a blessed time. And the one thing that I always reflected on, both in Ireland and my 8 months on the medical floor, was what is important in life? What is important in life? And throw everything else away. And I truly, truly believe this. And this is what I learned way back 30 years ago. The most important thing in life is relationships. That's all there is. You know, we can do 1,000 tasks or be called upon to do many things. And that's why Providence means so much to me, is because my work is so easy just because of my relationships. And Tony, when we first met, I don't know why I told you my cancer story, because I don't talk about my cancer. It's done, okay? But I remember we were sitting and we had this very intimate conversation of who you were and who I was. And I don't know if you remember this, but when you were diagnosed, you called me almost immediately and said, "What do I need to do?" And I said, "Surrender." Do you remember that?
I do.
Okay.
I do. Yes.
So I do feel like I'm a miracle, and the miracle is wonderful health. And the limp and the damaged leg I have just reminds me of God's presence, and that I've had cancer, but it's not going to define me. Right. So yeah, oh, this is so crazy to even say this, but cancer has been such a blessing in my life. Internally, it's given me this amazing relationship with God. And I never said why, why me, why me?
Yeah.
But sometimes I'm saying, okay, God, I must not have been as close as you wanted me to be. So the cancer is just a good tool for you to connect. So every day I meditate in the morning, and it's just a sense of gratitude. Totally blessed. Totally blessed.
Well, and for those of you who have listened to my podcasts up to this point, I did not tell Sister Susanne to say that her cancer was a blessing, but you've heard me say it. And it's just interesting that we both have gotten to that same conclusion independently, that having cancer, as crazy as it seems to people who don't have cancer, to think of it as a blessing. But when you go through an experience like what I'm going through now and what Sister Susanne has gone through, and you get through that initial, whatever that is, in the beginning, when, the day you find out or whatever it is, everyone has their own journey, and it takes them the time they need to take to get through whatever they got to get through. But, to get to that point where you actually call it a blessing is so much, it's so much about what you're talking about, the surrender. And it's also about the beauty in it. I just want to end today's podcast with just a message of gratitude for you, Sister Susanne, for continuing to touch as many people's lives as you do, and being so vibrant in the world, and a leader, and someone that folks, guys like me and women like others, at Providence can actually look to and say, that's who I want to be. I want to follow that path. And you do it so well. And I'm just so grateful that you're in my life personally. And any last words for you before we end today's podcast?
Oh gosh, Tony, thank you so much for inviting me to share. It's just so wonderful to know you and to love you and to watch you and your journey. And when I think about a journey, some people I think everybody has a journey, and some are more difficult than others, definitely. But I mean, I've done a lot of things in my life, and I don't want ever for a cancer to define me, but it's a journey. And I think everybody's just got to look at their journey right now. I think some journeys in this pandemic is that parents are home with their kids and trying to figure that out, which is a nightmare. And I think it was something that's been given to us and to you, those of you that have children. But I think the way we embrace this and deal with it will be a blessing in the end. So thank you, Tony, so much for inviting me. It's just been such a pleasure.
All right. All right. See you, everyone. Thanks for listening and watching. And we'll catch you on the next episode. All right. God bless you all.